Now, this was a movie that I was really deciding if I wanted to put a non-spoiler review out and then follow it up with some spoiler talk. And ultimately, I decided to really just kind of go through some of the main story beats here and share what I liked, a few of the things I didn't care for, and kind of just get all my thoughts in one video, because this is a movie that's really hard to talk about in a non-spoiler fashion. So if it isn't already obvious, this video will contain spoilers for No Way Home. So unless you're somebody who really doesn't care about spoilers, which I would advise against, do not watch this video unless you've already seen the movie. So No Way Home picks up right where Far From Home left off a few years ago. We have Mysterio revealing Spider-Man's identity to the entire world. We have Spider-Man there on the pool and MJ on the street below him. And MJ and Peter are just immediately surrounded by all these people trying to ask questions. And this is one of the parts you saw in the trailer. They're just trying to do anything they can to get away from people, get away from these helicopters and paparazzi. This is where you see them going underground in the subway tunnels. But they do eventually get back to Peter's apartment. And this is where they introduce Peter Parker's lawyer, better known as Matt Murdock, played by the same actor Charlie Cox from the Netflix Daredevil series. And this was the first of many gasps and claps in my theater. You had people and pretty much the reason for this scene, other than some early fan service, is as Peter's lawyer, he's just letting him know that these charges against him for killing Mysterio, they're not gonna hold up. There's a lot of evidence on the contrary, and of course everybody on the Earth knows that Peter's an Avenger, he helped stop Thanos, he's a hero.
Magic! More magic! Magic with a kick!
So Matt Murdock is just kind of plugged in here at the beginning to let the audience and let Peter know these charges aren't gonna stick. And then shortly after that, we get to see some of the consequences of the world now knowing that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. You have the scene in the diner where Pete, Ned, and MJ are all getting rejected from these schools. And then you have them all opening their letter for MIT, which is the school that they all really wanted to get into. And they're pretty much all rejected just for the negative implications and the blowback that the school would get for accepting these people that know Peter Parker, who's a very polarizing figure at the moment. So after this happens and Pete realizes he's kind of ruining his friends' lives, without meaning to, of course. This is another part we saw in the trailer. Pete goes to visit Doctor Strange in the Sanctorum, and this is where he asks if Doctor Strange would be able to rewind time before it was revealed that he was Spider-Man. He lets him know that the only other time we've used this power is when billions of lives were at stake, not because you and a couple of your friends are feeling these negative impacts. And also, we don't have the time stone anymore. So Strange comes up with an alternative idea. Since him and Pete have worked before, he kinda has sympathy for him. And he decides he can cast this spell so that nobody remembers that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And this is one of my first issues with this movie. I don't have a lot of them, but most of my issues I had were in the first half of this runtime. To me, the setup of how we get our plot, it feels a little bit forced. I don't know why Doctor Strange is so quick to cast this spell that is potentially really dangerous. And when they go down to the basement to cast it, there's just not even a conversation. He just goes right into the spell. And this is where we see Peter kind of throwing off his focus and ruining the spell.
Ned, he's my best friend. Oh, my Aunt May should really know.
Stop talking.
So because Strange's focus is thrown off here, the spell doesn't work and he's able to contain it in this box. And this is a pretty funny moment where Strange lets Pete know, you can talk to the admissions office and try to plead your case, but before doing that, you came here and asked me to cast this dangerous spell that could have major negative consequences. I enjoyed that moment a lot. And then we get the scene on the bridge. This is when Peter tracks down the admissions lady for MIT, and he's trying to talk to her about getting his friends into the school. And this is, of course, when we get Doc Ock's arm coming up to the bridge in this cool little fight sequence between him and Spider-Man, where we get like Doc Ock ripping off his suit and the nanotech going into his arms so Pete can like control his mechanical arms. And then right when we get the Goblin Bomb and we hear that iconic laugh, Strange teleports Pete and Doc Ock to the Sanctum, and he captures Doc Ock and explains to Peter that these other villains have come through into their world and they need to be captured. Peter is then able to track down Electro and Sandman, and Doctor Strange is ready to send them all back to their worlds. But before they get sent back, Peter wants to find a way to cure these guys so they at least have a fighting chance of not dying in their respective worlds. So this is another one of those trailer moments that was really cool. You see Peter taking the box with his web, and that's where you have Doctor Strange like, don't, and he does like his chest thing, takes him out of his body. And then you have Peter's spider sense, which is still like dodging Doctor Strange trying to take the box. That was really funny. And then this is where we get one of these really visually stunning sequences. And this is Peter and Doctor Strange fighting in the mirror dimension, which is really fun to look at. But another one of my cons in this movie, Peter beating Doctor Strange in the mirror dimension just felt a little bit off to me. I understand why it was necessary for the plot to move forward, but when you're fighting Doctor Strange on his home turf, I don't know if I necessarily buy Spider-Man actually beating Doctor Strange in any world. But at any rate, Spider-Man is able to trap Doctor Strange in the mirror dimension and takes all of these villains to Happy Hogan's apartment so he can try to work on these cures for them. He finally makes Doc Ock a new inhibitor chip after all these years. But before he can get these cures for the rest of these villains, the good old Green Goblin persona takes over Norman Osborn, and he convinces the rest of these guys to turn on Spider-Man. And this is where we get one of the most crushing moments in this movie. This is, of course, when Goblin has Pete face down on the ground, pulls him up, and May's there, and she's trying to help Pete any way she can. But realistically, she has no chance in this fight. So, Peter's trying to tell her to run, but she stands her ground, and Norman's glider just comes in and takes her out. I love this setup they did here, where it seems like Aunt May is just a little dinged up, like she's gonna make it through this. And then after giving her nephew a little speech about, with great power must come great responsibility, she just collapses on the floor. And they reveal Pete's hand and it's covered in Aunt May's blood. This one really hit hard. And this is one of the things I really loved about No Way Home. This movie really lingers on these moments, and it doesn't just make a joke about it. One of the issues I have with a lot of Marvel movies. But really, you just sit with these moments and you get to feel their full impact. At this point, MJ and Ned really want to see Peter, and Ned has this sling ring from Doctor Strange that Peter was able to take when they were in the mirror dimension. And when Ned waves his hands, he starts to see one of the portals forming, or as Spider-Man put it in Endgame, the little yellow flashy thing that Doctor Strange does. And he's able to open a portal to Spider-Man. And when this happened, all of the collective oxygen in my theater was just taken away. You literally heard almost every person in there
Oh my God! Okay, it's happening. Everybody stay calm.
What's the procedure, everyone? What's the procedure?
Stay calm.
So when Ned and MJ are, Peter, you see Spider-Man look at them and he's running down this dark alley and he jumps through the portal into their world. You're like, wait, this is a different suit. This is not an MCU or an Iron Spider. And then it happens. He rips off his mask and it's Andrew Garfield. And wow, the theater I was in, and I'm sure every theater around the world went crazy. Remember how many times he said that he's not in this movie?
Liar! You liar!
So Ned tries again to get the real Peter Parker, and you all know what happens next. In walks my Spider-Man, Toby Maguire. And at this point, you couldn't even hear the dialogue for about 20 seconds. There was just so much screaming and clapping and whistling. It was truly one of the best moments in any movie that I've ever experienced in a theater. So after this amazing sequence, Ned, MJ, Peter 2, and Peter 3, as they call them in the movie, which is Toby Maguire and Andrew Garfield, are able to track down Tom Holland's Peter on this rooftop, where Tom Holland is just crushed about losing his aunt. And he tells the other Spider-Men, you don't know what I'm going through. And this is when Toby Maguire and Andrew Garfield explain the people that they've lost in their worlds. And Andrew Garfield gets really emotional talking about losing Gwen, which was his MJ. And in a movie filled with all this fan service and these epic action sequences, this was probably my favorite scene in the entire movie. Definitely had me tearing up a little bit. So pretty much they convinced Peter to keep fighting so that Aunt May's death wasn't in vain. And these three Peters start working on these cures for their respective villains. And this is, I think, the one and only issue I had in the entire second half of this movie. Creating these cures in just this 5-10 minute sequence just felt a little too easy for me. I know this is like three geniuses working together, but if you could just like develop these cures, why didn't Toby Maguire try this in any of his movies? Why didn't Andrew Garfield try this in any of his movies? Besides the lizard. I didn't have major issues, it didn't take away from the experience. It just felt a little too easy for me. But this does create one of the funniest moments in the movie when they're talking about creating their synthetic webs and Toby just like shoots it out and he's like, you guys can't do that? They really pay some respect to these different Spider-Men. And after these cures are created, this is when we get that final showdown on the Statue of Liberty. And there's just countless funny and emotional scenes in the second half of this movie, so I'm gonna miss some. But another one of these great moments is when they acknowledge like they suck at working as a team. And Tom Holland's like, I don't want to brag, but I will. I was an Avenger. And Tobey Maguire's just like, awesome. What is that? And Andrew Garfield's like, is that a band? Are you in a band? Because in their worlds, they don't know what the Avengers are. They're just Spider-Man. So that was another sequence that the entire theater just erupted laughing. So after we get these awesome sequences of the three Spider-Men like swinging together, and all of these villains are cured, we have Ned bring Strange back from the mirror dimension, and Green Goblin breaks the box that had this cursed spell in it, and it breaks the barrier into their universe. So this was another one of those trailer moments when you heard Doctor Strange say like, they're coming through and I can't stop them. That's because all of these other villains are trying to break through into their universe. And this is the point where Peter realizes to protect the multiverse, the only way that that can be accomplished is if everybody forgets who Peter Parker is. So Strange is able to cast that spell, and we just have this heartwarming moment of Tom Holland saying thank you to these other two Spider-Men. And just when he says thank you and they all hug, I felt that. That was like a thank you from all of the fans for these two guys that paved the way for what we have now. But Peter says his goodbyes to Ned and MJ. Another moment where they're not making all these jokes, they're letting you sit with the emotion. And Peter and MJ swear that they'll find each other again. And then this is where we get into the ending of this movie, where Pete walks into the coffee shop and sees Ned and MJ. Another moment I really appreciated is when you see Pete walk into the coffee shop and MJ's like waving, and like he's so happy he's waving back, but then behind him walks in Ned. He just walks right past him. So MJ was actually waving to Ned, and neither of them know Peter. And it looks like he was about to kind of try to spark MJ's memory and tell her who he is, but then he sees the scar above her eyebrow and he overhears that her and Ned got into MIT, so he decides against telling them who he is, so they might have a chance to have a better future. And this was just a sequence that I loved. And then when he's visiting his Aunt May's grave, he has this little interaction with Happy, who also doesn't recognize him. And then something that has me so excited. We see Peter moving into this tiny little apartment in New York City. Sound familiar?
Rent? Give me rent.
And this movie ends with some of our classic Sam Raimi Spider-Man sequences. Peter makes his own suit. He's on his own. He doesn't have this Tony Stark tech. He doesn't have Iron Man or Doctor Strange or the Avengers. Pete is on his own. And fittingly, this movie ends with him swinging through New York City. Oh, goosebumps. Okay, so I have a laundry list of things I loved about this movie and just a few cons. So let's start with my couple negatives in an otherwise near perfect movie. And I already talked about a few of them when I was going through the story beats. My first one would be that Far From Home had this crazy ending sequence where Peter Parker's identity is revealed. And they do kind of give us moments of that in the beginning of No Way Home. But I really wanted it to be more of a focus for maybe even the first half of this movie. I kind of wanted to see more of those repercussions and consequences of Peter being revealed as Spider-Man, where I feel like it's just kind of glossed over here. Like you immediately have Matt Murdock telling him, these charges won't stick, you'll be fine. And other than Peter, Ned, and MJ not getting accepted into the colleges, you don't really see a lot of the consequences. It just kind of goes right into the next portion of this movie. And I understand there's a lot going on here. Fitting everything they did in 2.5 hours is truly remarkable. But for me personally, I would have liked to see more of a focus on the world knowing who Spider-Man is. The next two I already mentioned, so I'll just talk about them real quick again. It felt a little bit off to me, both that Doctor Strange cast this spell so quickly. I know Doctor Strange is a little bit arrogant and believes in his abilities, But as we saw in this movie, this is a very dangerous spell to cast. I liked his first response to Peter about the time stones and how the last time they did this was to literally save billions of lives. And in that respect, Peter and his friends' issues they're having doesn't seem to warrant this dangerous spell being cast. And then they just go into the basement, have zero conversation before about potential dangers and repercussions of casting this spell. Just felt a little rushed to me. And the second part of that I already mentioned, Peter beating Doctor Strange in the mirror dimension, it was a little hard for me to buy. Another one that I briefly mentioned was all the Peters creating these cures for their enemies. I understand how 3 big brains are always better than 1 brain. It just felt a little too easy for me. If this is the case and these cures can be created, I don't understand why Toby Maguire didn't try this in his universe, or Andrew Garfield didn't try this in his universe other than the Lizard. And hey, maybe that's a commentary on how far we've come as a society and the technology, the medical advancements we have now, and of course the Stark tech that we have now. And if that's the case, I get it. And my last negative here is I don't think we needed the Sandman, or for that case the Lizard, but especially Sandman, because all these other villains had a purpose. His arc was complete at the end of Spider-Man 3, and I just didn't really think he was quote-unquote a villain anymore. I feel like he had the most closure and his arc was complete by the end of the Sam Raimi trilogy. So Sandman felt a little bit out of place.
I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just want you to understand. I forgive you.
All right, with those out of the way, let's talk about the many, many things this movie got right. And I already talked about some of these, so I'll be brief when bringing up a few of these points. But number one, I love how it lets you sit with all of these emotional moments. I'm so glad they didn't force feed these jokes into these impactful sequences. I'm so happy they didn't force feed humor when Aunt May passes away, or when Peter's saying goodbye to Ned and MJ, or the scene at the end when Peter's at Aunt May's grave and Happy comes up to him. For somebody like me who thinks that Marvel can be a bit too jokey at times, that was definitely a refreshing change of pace. Next up, this has to be mentioned. Tom Holland, Toby Maguire, and Andrew Garfield are so damn good together. Like, I know it's not gonna happen, but I wish we could get an entire multiverse movie with all 3 of them as our heroes. And not only their chemistry comedically, but also emotionally was off the charts. I love how they even played into the memes, like with the 3 Spider-Men pointing at each other, and they also played into these cheesy, campy moments from the past Spider-Man movies. Like where you have Toby Maguire and he's like up against this bar, and Andrew Garfield's like, "What's wrong?" And he's like, "Oh, it's my back."
My back. Oh, my back.
There are so many of these little moments that just like pay homage to the previous Spider-Man films, and I respected the hell out of that. And then to go right along with that, each Spider-Man is given a couple emotional moments here throughout this movie. The one that really got me for Toby was when Tom Holland is about to take the glider and just like stab the Goblin, where Toby comes up and like grabs it and stops him. Just like how he did with the Green Goblin in the first Spider-Man from 2002. No words need to be spoken. Toby just gives him this look of like, "I'm not gonna let you go down this path. I know you're better than that." And the look they share was more than enough for me. It conveyed the message perfectly. And then the biggest one for Andrew Garfield that probably got me the most emotional during the entire movie was during the trailer sequence where you see MJ falling off the scaffolding, and then Tom Holland and her get like this close, and the Green Goblin comes in and swipes Tom Holland away. And for a brief second, the entire theater, they were gasping like there's no way they're gonna kill MJ off. But then you get exactly what I was hoping for. Andrew Garfield springs to action, and there's just nothing that's gonna stop him from saving this girl's life. And oh my goodness, when they get to the ground and MJ asks if he's okay, he just like starts tearing up. It was just a great moment. It kind of felt like his closure for Gwen, while simultaneously being like this redeeming moment for what happened with Gwen as well. Just wrapped up in this one moment so beautifully. I love that they have Andrew Garfield saving her and not Tom Holland. As far as villains go, aside from the Lizard and Sandman, I thought all the villains here were brilliant. I really appreciated Willem Dafoe's older, a little bit less over-the-top Goblin performance here. Like the Goblin from 2002 will always be untouchable.
Out am I?
But this felt like the right approach for this older character. He still definitely has these over-the-top moments, but they're a little more far and few between. Alfred Molina absolutely crushes it again as Doc Ock. And if any of these villains deserve to be cured, it was definitely him. Because in Spider-Man 2, he wasn't a bad person at all. When he started making these bad choices, this was after his inhibitor chip broke, and kinda when the metal arms took on a brain of their own and just used his body as their physical form. So I was so happy that he was the first one to be cured, and he actually helped the Spider-Man in that fight sequence 2 different times. You the real MVP, Doc Ock.
Oh, Rosie, I love this boy.
And then, of course, Electro. Now, he's a little bit polarizing because he's definitely not like Max was in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. This isn't the same character at all. But to me, that was a good thing. This was just Jamie Foxx being Jamie Foxx. And personally, this is the character I wish we would have got in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Tonally, this is a much darker and more brutal take on Spider-Man. And really, it's darker than most Marvel movies. Something I definitely appreciated. Like near the end of the movie in the Statue of Liberty scene, Tom Holland is just beating the shit out of the Green Goblin, and for good reason. But this was definitely the most violent and hateful I've ever seen Tom Holland's Spider-Man, and I loved the hell out of it.
Violence is cool.
Dave?
Kidding.
A couple of my biggest issues with MCU's take on Spider-Man got fixed here, and that was Aunt May and MJ. Marissa Tomei finally gets to shine in this movie. She's such a terrific actress. But in the first 2 Spider-Man movies, I didn't feel the Aunt May Peter Parker connection. To me, it just didn't have much heart, especially when you compare it to the previous Spider-Man movies and the relationship with Andrew Garfield and Sally Field, or Toby Maguire and Rosemary Harris. But in this movie, we finally get some of that connection, and it made Aunt May's death all the more impactful. And then as far as MJ goes, the first 2 movies, we really didn't know anything about her. Like after 2 movies, I would really like to know the love interest of my hero a little bit more than we did. Hell, after Far From Home, I think I liked Liz more in Homecoming than I liked MJ. But this movie makes up for lost time, and now I really like this character, and I really believe her relationship with Peter. And to go on top of that, you really feel like Pete, MJ, and Ned are best friends in this movie. Their chemistry is just great, they bounce off each other really well, and you can tell that these 3 legitimately are really good friends off camera, and that shines through on the screen. This is definitely the best Peter development out of the entire Home series. He truly does go from being a boy to becoming Spider-Man by the end of this movie. He deals with losing people he cares about, he has something worth fighting for, and now he truly deserves the title of Spider-Man. And Tom Holland, he might deserve an award for Best Actor for this movie. Seriously, he was that good. This is the most range of emotions he's gotten to show in any 3 of these Spider-Man movies, and he crushes it. He makes me feel so many emotions throughout this runtime, and he's really good at crying too. You really feel bad for this kid. Tom Holland makes you believe it. And then finally, I loved this ending because it took care of probably my biggest issue with MCU's Spider-Man. And that is that Peter is no longer in Tony's shadow. He is now his own man. He doesn't have Stark Tech, he doesn't have Doctor Strange or the Avengers to lean on. He's on his own. He's now not Spider-Man in the Avengers, he's just Spider-Man. And that has me so excited for the future of this character. And really, this movie got rid of about 90% of the issues I had with Marvel's take on my favorite superhero of all time. You got Aunt May and MJ development. You got these serious moments that they don't force feed jokes into, like Marvel's guilty of. Peter and MJ's relationship got some development that made it feel more real. And it took Peter out of Tony's shadow. He's now just Spider-Man. This is a 9 out of 10, damn near a perfect movie, and had the setup been as good as the payoff, it could have been a 10 out of 10. But the first half was still good, but it was probably like a 7 out of 10 for me, standard Marvel movie. Second half, best hour and a half of Spider-Man I've ever seen on screen, easy 10 out of 10. So I would call this really a movie of 2 halves. The first half good, maybe close to great, the second half perfect.
You win. Perfect.
Maybe my favorite Spider-Man movie of all time. It's still hard to say, I'm such a big fan of Spider-Man 2, but this is definitely the best movie we've gotten since that. But that's gonna do it for my review of Spider-Man No Way Home. Please let me know what you thought of this movie down in the comments below. Did it live up to the hype for you? Is this one of your favorite Marvel movies of all time? Or are you against the general consensus where this movie was kind of a disappointment for you? Definitely excited to hear what you think about this movie and the direction of this character going forward. And as always, if you enjoyed this review, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing right over here so you don't miss any content going forward. And if you want to see some other reviews, reaction videos, ranking lists on my channel, you can check some of those out right over here on this side. And as always, we'll see you in the next one.